Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast at the Edinburgh Festival Fringe. And we start today with a song you could have heard there.
I didn't do it, how preposterous, you know me and I wouldn't do it. Tell me how else could I prove to you I didn't do it. I wouldn't do it, I couldn't, I wouldn't let the name Quincy be dragged through the mud. I didn't do it, simply laughable, I'm lovely and I wouldn't do it. Croydon's lovable philanthropist, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it, I shouldn't, do not listen to this evil hag and her thought.
But I'm here.
Blast.
You see, he told you I was dead, but now I'm here.
Dang.
Now ask yourself why he would tell you I was dead.
Gosh.
I'm here instead. If he was honest, he wouldn't have strung you along. I was shocked.
Blast.
He thought he'd killed me, but my presence proves I'm not.
Dang.
Thanks to this hip flask, I will live to stop his plot.
Gosh.
Look at his face. Does he look like a man who has done nothing wrong?
Oh, I believe her. She's vindictive and divisive, she's manipulated not only me but all of you to try and get me hated. She's fabricated her death, yes, I thought she was dead, but I know now she's not. She wants my fortune, yes, she needs an airtight alibi to murder Quincy and take my money off to Uruguay with her new lover, some drunk or other, or her brother. Now do the right thing, arrest her on the spot. I didn't do it, how preposterous, you know me and I wouldn't do it. Tell me how else could I prove to you I didn't do it. I wouldn't do it, I couldn't, I wouldn't let the name Quincy be dragged through the mud. I didn't do it, simply laughable, I'm lovely and I wouldn't do it. Croydon's lovable philanthropist, I couldn't do it. I wouldn't do it, and I shouldn't do it. Listen to this evil hag and her thoughts.
Lies upon lies upon lies, and he's piled them up so high that you just cannot see what's behind the charming man you thought you knew. I believe them in bygone days, but I found out the truth and I found out the hard way. He treats women like dirt and he kills them for sport, and he thinks it's all awfully fun. How it's awfully done.
I think he killed them.
Well, I'm not sure, you know.
I'm certain he's a real villain. Don't you remember how he treated us?
Like worthless vermin.
Yes, I'm quite certain.
You need only look at my hip flask to find out the truth. He calls himself a gentleman, pretending he's of highest rank and born of highest blood. But he is lower than the dirt for what he's done to us, and what he's done to all the women that he's used. Isabella too, call yourself a man. You're no man, you're a beast, not a man. You don't get to tarnish that name, it's not yours to claim. Don't call yourself a man.
I didn't do it.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did.
No, I didn't.
Yes, you did. He did it. 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 He did it.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits, the well-known anagram of the words births, obits, which I think you'll agree covers pretty much everything from first to last. And I hope, in its own small way, Musical Talk can do the same. Well, we're right in the middle of our regular annual coverage of the Edinburgh Festival Fringe, and what better way of starting an episode than with a song from one of the shows you could have heard up there. And that song was called The Confrontation by Alistair McNamara of the Cambridge-based theatrical company Intrepid Fools. And that song came from their very entertaining and amusing show, The Murderous Philanthropist of Croydon Town. And we'll be hearing another song from that rather strong score later in the programme. But first, let's have a conversation about some new writing. And unusual new writing at that, because the subjects, and I do use the plural there, as you note, of the next conversation were two new musicals, both called Wall. Wall 1 and Wall 2. They actually had much longer titles than that, but we'll hear the details of what those shows were actually called in full from their author, Jake Brash, in just a minute. But suffice to say, the word wall does not come without political baggage, particularly if you live anywhere near the United States of America's border with Mexico. But the thing that made these two shows so fascinating for me was their clever and extremely sophisticated structure, which was that one show fed into the second show as a kind of sequel, but that show in turn then fed back into the first one. You'll hear in the following conversation the shows being described as having a figure of 8 structure, and that's extremely unusual. It's also very unusual to have any musical with a sequel, particularly if that sequel can then have a further sequel, which is the first show. You might want to write that down and look at it later on. But first, let's hear a conversation. It starts with the writer, Jake Brash, and later on we're joined by the director, Shauna Han, to discuss the two musicals called Wall. Musical talk.
Hello, hello, hello. My name is Jake Brash, and I wrote the book Music and Lyrics for Wall and Wall 2.0, which is 2 companion pieces that are one-act musicals.
And I think it would be fair to talk about the subtitles of both shows, because I think that will give great illumination into what you're trying to do.
Okay, well, let's see if I can nail them. I wrote them. It's embarrassing. The first is Wall, ! A thinly veiled metaphor for our current political situation. And the second is Wall 2.0, a thinly veiled manifesto for how to mend our broken system.
Now, I've got to ask you, this is new writing.
Mm-hmm.
It is political writing. Of course, when I think of a political show and a political sequel, I immediately go back to George Gershwin and Of Thee I Sing.
Yeah, of course.
Let Me Cake. Both musicals, of course, Pulitzer Prize winning. So good luck on putting that on the
right.
If they spot you. What I liked about the piece very much was the fact that it is political, but it is a metaphor. I think you're absolutely right to use that phraseology. And I particularly like the fact that actually you can impose, I think, or project onto it what you think is going on compared from your own knowledge. Now, obviously, we are here in Britain for the Edinburgh Fringe. We're one step removed from the American political system. But obviously, we get to see a lot of it. We're fully aware of your current president. There's at least one character I thought I could project the president on. Wall, of course, is a very resonant word in terms of the political situation in America at the moment. But, of course, being a metaphor, you can take it that way, or you can just draw it back as a parallel about humanity, because that's what politics is. Mm-hmm. So what's your take, what's your tone, what are you hoping to do?
Well, when I was commissioned to write a political piece, but I was also in an educational setting, so I kind of didn't want to write a piece that would be too subversive, you know what I mean? Which was a very interesting challenge. But then actually the more I started thinking about it, like the more I started thinking about the kind of piece that I wanted to write, I just sort of zoomed further and further out. And I thought like, oh wow, like these patterns and like the patterns of history and the cycles that we go through. And actually one of the reviews of our show described our two shows in the way that they're viewed as sort of having a figure 8 structure.
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about that.
Yeah. And that it really is sort of about how we perceive the past as we go towards the future, and sort of the ebb and flow of democracies and other forms of government that come out of democracies and what democracy comes out of. So I think that I definitely, when I was thinking about our current political situation and thinking about bringing a show to an international festival, what's going on here is not that much different.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
There are many parallels about a divided nation at the moment politically,
right,
and a certain dissatisfaction with the, I use the word broadly, establishment.
Right.
Yes, so yes, there are parallels, as there are all over the place, of course.
Right.
Every democracy is struggling with maturity, actually.
Mm-hmm. And I think that we're in sort of a bizarre post-truth era, you know, and really being able to have to fathom who we've been and who we want to be. And I think that what's been amazing with working with young people is understanding that there is, from an educational point of view, I realize there's a real chance here to have people sort of begin to reckon with the questions, even more than trying to promote activism or saying like, what do you believe in? Like just being able to actually start with what are the fundamental questions that we need to be asking ourselves in society, which sounds like a silly subject for a play being so broad, but I really...
Sure it is. I think it sounds like a very wise sense of set question.
Yeah, but I think that sort of was my place of beginning, is like, how accessible can I make this? And these kids are from... We're middle America, you know what I mean? So they have parents, I'm a radical gay leftist, but they have parents who are extremely conservative. And to be able to write a show that would sort of appease all of the parties was something that I first saw as sort of a challenge that I would rather not have to put up with, but actually began to really appreciate. Like, how can I see a show that the parent who believes in traditional marriage and conservative politics can be like, yeah, I can get behind that, and still bring those two factions to the same logical ending, which is that we need to be able to find a way to talk.
Well, it is all about, George or war, to use Churchill's own quotation.
Right.
Just because I know I've only got you for a small amount of time, so I'd just briefly like to touch on the structure before we carry on a little bit about the tone and content, which is this, you described it beautifully as that figure eight, or possibly a Mobius strip, which of course is the impossible one, because it has the twist in it and yet is still continuous. But you've written it as War and War 2. Did you always envisage it as two separate plays, or did you see it as one play with two acts, and have you ever tried doing it in the other direction?
Great question. So I suggested...
With 3 parts, I'm so sorry.
No, I suggested that we flip them every day.
Oh.
That was my idea, but then my lovely director here said that would be a marketing nightmare,
And we do have your director with us.
Yes, we
Hi,
do.
yes.
And your name, just for the record?
My name is Sean Han. I'm the director of theater at Denver School of the Arts.
And we'll be talking with you more fully about that in a minute, if
Sure.
that's okay. But let's have a 3-way conversation about the structure. So I can understand for marketing purposes that would have been extremely difficult. Although what a wonderful idea. So you had always written it with that intention?
Yes.
Yeah, they needed to stand on their own because we had 2 separate slots at the Fringe Festival. So we knew we had to market each piece as their own piece, and then we could also encourage the audience to come back if they like the other one, or come back tomorrow and see the other one.
But it was written
It
to
was
be seen as separate things, or you, in your head, you thought, I'm going to write this in such a way that it can be flipped?
I was asked to write a musical, 2 musicals that are an
This is your
hour.
manifesto, what you were told to do,
I was told to write 2 musicals that stood on their own. I decided that I'd rather have them be related in some sense. So I actually was a fascinating challenge, and I was aware of how we were going to present them when I wrote them. So I really dove into the fact of like, how can I write something that stands on its own but will be enhanced when viewed with the other part? And then when you flip them or do whatever you sort of want with them, it all tells the same story.
You were talking about your own position, but also that bringing in other people. Have you been successful in that in America? I assume it's been performed there first. And how is it being taken here in Britain? Because there are cultural differences, although you've been absolutely right to talk about parallel problems that we're currently labouring under, if I may say.
I think there's been various reactions. There are the people who look at it and try to find like the current events parallels, like oh, I can attribute this character to Trump, or I can see that and that. And then there are the people who automatically go to zoom out land. You know what I mean? And so
just take it as a story.
Right, and just take it as a story and take it as broad sort of ideas for our world. And I honestly think that the big thing is like where you're coming at it with, like if depending on how pressed you feel or in your society at the moment with this current politics, you'll either come into it with that or you'll come into it with a broader perspective.
I should pay you the compliment of saying, however, at least it appears to me that you weren't actually saying one side is better than the other, particularly in Wall 1, I'm going to call it. You had 2 very different societies. You had the stratified religious-based, for want of a better phrase, tradition-loving, and then you had a group that called themselves progressive and seemed to be more modern and used, selfies and hashtags as a way of conversational greeting. So, you were signalling to us very easily what we should be seeing in those things, and yet both of those organisations or both of those societies suffered very much from groupthink, that actually you have to agree with the received wisdom in both sides. So one was progressive, but still suffering from having to exclude people who didn't accept the agreed norms, but who agrees norms anyway. And you had exactly the same thing in a much more stratified way, but clearly the same parallel in the original. So you had 2 groups which looked totally different, act totally differently, and yet were suffering from the same problems. I think there was a great deal of sophistication and cleverness in that.
Well, thank you. I mean, you get it. You know what I mean?
Very kind. But
No, you really do, and I think that is the the sort of thing that I'm seeing right now. And
it could have easily been a polemic, I suppose, but it wasn't. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So, yes.
And because, on the left, it's so easy to condemn bigotry and racism, and by all means those things should absolutely be condemned, but it's also a much more difficult conversation to ask, how can we actually engage in a way that can actually change policy? And I think what I was trying to do in creating these two worlds is saying, look, here are these two, I love how you call it groupthink. They just really believe fully in what they have been told to believe, and just that, no matter what that is not productive for society. It just isn't.
More, yes.
Even if it's everything I believe in.
Could I ask you a very quick musical theatre question?
Great.
I have to ask you sideways. The processionator says that he's just walked out of Gilbert and Sullivan to me. He may not be dressed like a Gilbert and Sullivan character, but he speaks and sings like one. Is it a deliberate thing? Because obviously that's also about topsy-turvydom.
Right.
In a way, I can plug you right back into 150 years of musical theatre songwriting.
Exactly. Well,
it's not a bad place to be.
I'm obviously a musical theatre buff. You know what I mean?
Sort of got something.
Yeah. And so different places are definitely quietly plugged in. I wanted to be sure to write something that I felt was not. So many musicals these days are musicals making fun of other musicals, and it's just pastiche land, you know what I mean? And
Urinetown, for example.
Yeah, Urinetown is a great example.
You can only eat yourself so many times.
Right, and so how can you do pastiche in a way that's closer to Sondheim's Follies than Urinetown? There was sort of that question for me, is like, when I choose to sort of emulate some sort of world, why am I doing it, and how can I do it tastefully, and how can I also transcend that into being original and specific to this world? But that's something I struggle with, honestly, as a musical theater writer, is knowing sort of, people want to hear what's familiar. And then
evocation is a very different thing from destruction, isn't it?
Exactly.
So you can do both through pastiche, but one is a healthier outcome, I think.
I agree. Yeah.
So just very briefly then, what influences would you say have affected you most in the writing of Wall and Wall 2?
I mean, obviously I'm a Sondheim freak. I'm a total freak. And then that's difficult. I mean, musically, the other thing I should say is I wrote this piece in a huff. I wrote it in about a month.
Oh, right, gosh.
Yeah, so there was a lot of... And
a favourable tailwind.
Yeah, but it was really interesting because once a really amazing thing was sort of establishing musical motifs that were inspired by a variance of composers, but then really... when you have that, I wrote this piece quicker than I've ever written any musical theater piece, and when you have those in your head constantly going, and I could take them and see okay, how does this fit into part one, how does this fit into part two, and it gave me a really interesting moment to reprise songs or themes that an audience may have not seen before.
Yes.
Which was a very interesting thing, is how can I write something that is a song that stands on its own but is actually a reprisal of another song, or a continuation, or a prelude.
Collage and fugue.
Right. So yeah, exactly. So the sort of theme and variation nature of that musical world was sort of what I really landed in, is here is a culture that I'm making up that has its own sort of cultural traditions, and therefore has its own musical traditions, and how can I sort of play with the fact of how those might change and bend through time.
Well, thank you for talking to us, because I know you've got to run off to another show, because what's the point in being in Edinburgh if you don't? But I hope perhaps to see you at the Fringe in the future. So
perfect. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Lovely seeing
you.
Thank you. So moving to you, you had the very difficult job of taking what's on paper, using paper in the old-fashioned sense, a tradition usually, but and then actually making that into a living production with a cast and making sense of those links. So obviously, I always think a director has a privileged job, in a sense, of actually, you are the person who navigates the ideas of the writer to allow us, the audience, to see it. You are the guide, if you like, through the jungle of new writing.
Right.
And I love new writing. So how do you approach that? Was that a challenge? Because this is a lovely two-piecer is already a complicated thing. Plus his great figure eight structure.
Yeah. Well, I do have to say there's a second director too that he's already out and about, which was also another student of mine way back when. So both Eli, the director, and Jake both went to Denver School of the Arts. Then they went to NYU, and then they met kind of through this project, which was really great. I think the fantastic thing was the new writing. So I could pick Jake's brain all the time. And I think one of the funniest comments was when we get to the laser guns thing, and I'm like, so are you seeing laser guns, or what kind of laser gun? And he's like, I don't know, that's up to you, I just write it. So that was kind of our back and forth a lot, but really
so
looking
you're
at the
responsible
world.
for the Michael Jackson gloves with the lights in. I thought
Yeah.
I rather like that as a touch, actually. Yes.
There you go. Yeah. So it was creating what kind of things that we have, but then also working really close with Eli, who was the director of Wall 1. So we would find those
You
parallels.
delineated it that way, did you?
Yeah.
One each, and
Yeah.
then you had to find links.
Yes.
Oh, rather than co-directing both.
Correct.
Oh, now, did that kick up any problems?
No, I don't think so. I
Have
think
you had
we
to sort
were
of subsequently marry things?
a little bit. Yeah, we were in each other's rehearsals enough
good.
to be able to go, oh, well, we're doing this. Oh, well, we're doing this. And I think we cast it together too. So I think casting the whole thing, especially when you have 65 kids that all want the role, to get into an ensemble and what that ensemble is. So then it was really looking at who are the people that live within these societies, and then how to make those function was the biggest challenge, I think, especially for teenage actors. Not having something that is written and proven to be good, quote unquote.
Yes.
That was the hardest challenge, I think, for this.
Always the problem with new writing, though, anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, I love new writing. I'm a great fan of everything that's come before. Gilbert and Sullivan have already been mentioned, as you know.
Yes.
But you bring the past with you, but the new is where it's going, and these are the future Gilbert and Sullivans.
Right.
And actually, you wrote something rather marvellous as a programme with the show, which you don't always get here in Edinburgh.
Yeah.
And I very much liked your own manifesto about new writing being the future, and therefore
Mm-hmm.
it must be supported, and things have to be developed, and they can be tweaked and twiddled. So. Obviously, we heard from Jake, but it was quite quickly written. What is the sort of the conception? What's the conception and gestation of this show? Would you say, of these shows? I see them in my head as one. But
Yeah, so do I. We actually started talking about it about a year ago, but Jake's schedule is crazy in New York because he's a very successful playwright, even though he's very young. So he was in 3 different festivals before this, doing all sorts of different plays, and then he was like, okay, now I can turn my mind to this project, where we had to do lots of Skyping sessions and things, because I'm in Colorado, he's in New York.
Isn't the modern world wonderful,
It's
though?
wonderful, yes. And so we had lots of conversations of what it could be and the requirements that we have 65 actors. And he's been to the Fringe. He came to the Fringe in 2008. We had written our own original show there as the ensemble. The high school kids wrote it, and he wrote a section called Puberty the Musical, which was hysterical. And it was kind
Sorry,
of...
I'm going to say something terrible.
Yes.
Does it grow on you?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes. So he had already done that, and he knew what this world was, and I think that was the most important, that he knew what the Fringe was and what kind of work goes here. And then we started talking about why would the average Fringe goer come see American teenagers? What's the hook? What's the, how are we going to get people into the seats? And I think
that is
always.
It is a business, to quote
exactly.
curtains.
So we were trying to figure out, well, what would I want to see of these American kids? And when we talked about, well, what's going on in our country, so what is something that can start there and reflect it a little bit about the policies and politics that are going on. And I actually watched both of them in succession today as well, with what's going on back in the United States in the last couple of days.
Yes, it's been bad news.
Yeah, bad news, but it's also like, just things landed a little bit differently today than they had, based on, the huge white supremacist and Black Lives Matter movement and all those things, and just the staunch, belief in that we're right, and that he says that over and over, we're right, you're right, back and forth.
Yes.
And that's what we see every day in America, is somebody very, very staunchly on one side or the other, even though they might not be able to prove why they're on that side.
Of course. I mean, in a slightly different way, of course, the Brexit vote here in Britain has taken us pretty much down the middle of the country. Yeah. And the nation is not currently together, despite protestations from the top that it is. I make no view one way or the other, certainly not on record.
Right.
But there is a sense of polarisation, I think.
Exactly.
And that can be a very dangerous thing, and that, of course, is exactly what war's all about. I want to talk about one or two of your rather splendid shared directorial flourishes.
Sure.
Can I say The War is a wonderful piece, because it's sort of translucent paper, isn't it?
It is.
But that holds for light so beautifully, so
yes.
Nicely thought through. And of course, it must be easy to take it back back and forth between countries.
Yes,
without
it's paper.
too much. Yes, without too much expenditure on the customs. But it's such a simple idea, and it looks so clever. And then the rest of it is sort of, that is your principal prop, essentially.
Right.
There are a few other things like laser guns and a bit of armour, but it's such a monumental piece. It's also, it's actually meant to, there is talk of the elephant in the room. It's a throwaway, poor joke, shall we say, deliberately poor. But the elephant in the room is the presence or absence of the war in society in both things. So there's lovely parallels for that. But it looks beautiful. It's just, I like the fact that it was it could be both the wall and its own ruins, sort of beautiful ruins.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, we had also, originally when we purchased it, we thought that it was going to be able to be sat on top of, but since it's paper, there was just no way to use it. So then we had to try to figure out, okay, especially in wall 2, because the wall doesn't come up until the very end, how can we utilize it a little bit in trying to set the scene and tell a story? So but it is a very easily to move around. We almost tried to twist it at one point, so we were experiencing it.
Well, it looked very beautiful at the beginning of Act 2. It's clearly how I'm thinking of it.
Yes.
But, we're told immediately that it's ruins, and indeed sort of two protagonists meet at the ruins at midnight by chance. So that's also a lovely setup anyway. But it just seemed... It just worked so very nicely, but it was so... It's a beautiful prop. Not all props in Edinburgh are beautiful, but it's a figurative beautiful prop, and that's even better.
Yes, we were very fortunate.
And I've got to ask you were the director of Act 2.
Yes.
I suspect along your travels you've met Monty Python then, haven't you? Because your nights are very... and I mean this in the most positive way, Pythonesque.
Yes.
And they look like they're enjoying themselves as well.
They love that role, yes.
Now, there is quite a lot to be asked of your cast in some senses, because, they're very extreme societies. Just in Wall 1, for example, there's a I have to say a misogynist society. That's the one that's trapped so thoroughly in its traditions that every sector, age as well, is sort of trapped, and difference is not tolerated, as it isn't in the Speech Mark's progressive version, where you're not allowed to be individual in any way. So you're asking young people who are living in a better world, I hope, to act to engage with a misogynistic environment, even though that's going to be torn down. But also there's gender fluidity, and you do some lovely things with costumes as well. I like the fact there seems to be, obviously men are wearing female costumes, vice versa, but there's also costumes which have been cut in half and sewn together. So there's lots of that's also been used for future fashion in the second one as well. So I thought you used what you've got very nicely to create a sort of create diversity and cohesion, which is quite an interesting thing to be able to do, particularly on a limited budget. So they've got some very nice little things. But how are your actors coping with grappling with these political issues and these socio-political issues?
They are very intelligent actors, and we had lots of conversations at the very top with Jake, especially. He came out early in the process in January and spent a week with us, and there was no script yet at that point.
He sort of, as mentioned, it was a gestation period.
It was very fast, and so he did a lot of workshopping just with 80 kids in a room, which is insane. But he got them to imagine the society where there was this wall, and he did a bunch of improv with them, and
workshopping in a way.
It was awesome, and they were chanting. They created these chants about the wall. That's where the birth of the Holy Man came, the Holy Boy came. It was from the improvs of those kids, believing and getting into the reality of what the society could be. And then we talked about it. We have a transgender student in the cast. We have
well done.
We have unisex bathrooms now in our building. We're an art school, so we're a little bit more forward than some other school districts, things like that. So, but they actually really loved the idea of going so far forward. There's just no gender, and we talked about that. What are things that are going on in America right now, and then let's push it as far to the extreme as possible. What would that look like?
But that's essentially science fiction almost, isn't it? I mean, good science. I don't mean magic and laser beams, although there are laser guns in this. I'm actually talking about the idea of let's take an idea about what's going on in society and take it to its nth degree to see what that tells us about the idea and society.
Exactly.
It's essentially what's happened here, isn't it? So
Yep.
Do you think of it as a science fiction story?
No, not really.
I mean, I wouldn't classify it that way, but it shares some tropes, doesn't it?
Exactly. And I think that's what was exciting for the students that were involved in it is, let's examine what are the things going on, because there are, like Jake was talking about, such extremes right now going on in American politics. And it's either you voted for Trump or you didn't vote for Trump, and where is that, and who identifies with those groups. And it's a very interesting thing to see. And that's also something that I appreciate a lot, is that it doesn't come out one side or the other loudly.
I was saying exactly that. It's not a polemic one side or the other. It's actually a much broader observation about all of society, from left to right, from up to down, from
and
old
that
to
was
young
important.
as well, actually. I mean, he was also saying, splendidly, I thought, but a younger generation will have an older generation of parents who may not share those views, and vice versa. All positions are valid to a degree.
Right.
One has to, one has to square the circle.
Yes.
But once again, that also comes down to you as a director to see if you think there's an edge which is just a little bit too sharp,
right,
and to file it down a bit. Has there been much of that? Did you have to do any ameliorating?
A little bit. In Wall 2, the current minister, we talked about having the daughter leading instead of the minister, and that's a direct relation. And so that started to get a little bit too much.
Close,
too close to real. And so that's when then the other side had to up the crazy a little bit. So if you looked at Larry's side, Larry, when we first got to Edinburgh,
Larry is the usurper, essentially.
Yes, and he was too normal. And we're like, okay, there's something mentally unstable about you. She talks about you being mentally unstable. Let's magnify that. So he has finally gotten there, which is a lovely thing to see, because he's making really big, broad choices that have never been there before. So,
really? Okay, right. So you can see the development of the character and the performance.
Just in this week, so it's been great.
And of course, you do that balancing, because you're right. You can see the reliance on other family members in the Bruno faction, but simple things about building towers and coming on smoking a cigar, for goodness sake, allows you to project wherever you wish.
Right.
As an audience,
right.
I projected my interpretation of Mr. Trump more onto Larry than I did onto Bruno.
That's great.
have other people come to you and said, I see it this way or I see it that way?
No, not since we've been here.
And I should say, it's not a clear cut. It's not a caricature.
It's a little bit
of
both.
It's a taste and a flavour here and there.
Right. No, it's exciting that you say that.
Thank you. I've never been exciting in my life.
There you go. No, we just haven't had much feedback as far as so it's fun, except for when we did it in America right before we came. It was a gala performance and it was for their parents, so of course parents are going to love whatever you got, so it's been fun to see that. Well, we did have one thing in Larry's number. I'm poopy. He's poopy, and I'm good. We had the emoji, the poop emoji. We used to have 5 of them in the number,
okay, fine.
and that was one comment that the parents had made that was too much. It was too in your face, and so that is the one thing that we've changed and cut back on. So there's just one poop emoji is dancing.
I have a feeling that would play better in Britain as well. So.
That's what we thought too.
And, British audiences are very quiet naturally anyway.
Yes.
We're not whoopers on the whole.
Right.
There are. My experience of a British audience is there are 3 kinds. The British audience who are there politely, who haven't enjoyed it, and you can normally tell.
Yeah.
Then there's the British audience who have enjoyed it a great deal, but they're engaging so thoroughly they don't let you know until the end that they enjoyed it. So when I saw certainly Wall today, because there was a big crowd in Wall, number 1. I hope there will be for Wall 2 as well.
Yes.
But tomorrow. But the audience, I thought, have been absorbing it because there's a lot to absorb, and then they let it all out. And just occasionally you do get a British audience, I'm sad to say, who may have had a drink, and it's a little early in the morning at the moment for that, who are a little bit louder. But have you noticed a difference, and this is just a cultural thing, have you noticed that a predominantly British audience here in Edinburgh is reacting differently to what you might have expected?
From no, because I've been here before.
Oh, jolly good, fine. You're very welcome.
This is my 4th Fringe with kids, but they're just quiet. That's the biggest thing. But it's interesting to stay in the theatre, because then we can hear little bits, and then they'll realize that we're part of it, and then they're like, "Oh, well, yes, we enjoyed it," and we're like, "Really?" It's the kids. The kids don't understand that we got it, but that they got it. Yeah.
If you'd like to feedback, just from my point of view, I don't interview people about shows I don't like. I don't think it's fair. So just the very fact we're having this conversation meant I was engaged and intrigued by it from the very first.
Oh, great!
And I loved your programme saying new writing is the future anyway. So you pretty much hooked me at the beginning. But then there was this beautifully structured piece. So what's the future for Wall 1 and Wall 2? Is there a future for Wall 1 and Wall 2? That might be a better question.
Jake has always said he would like to take it further, and actually we had a whole conversation of kind of the restructure, and he's always saying, if I had to do it again, this is what I would change, and we both agreed more time. We would have loved to workshop it more. We cut a number, like right before we got here. Wall 2 used to open with a ballad between the 2 girls called Crumbles, and it was started as a ballad, and then it became kind of funky when the wall fell down kind of thing. And we also had the processionator coming out doing a prologue, and we realized that kind of was too slow.
You also don't need it.
No.
Funny enough. Although I
So
love
we-
his performance.
Yeah, so we jumped right in and just started with the scene, so you set it up really quickly. People still are like, but you can't tell it's a musical, there needs to be something. And I was like, no, I think it works now. So
Also, you don't have to slavishly follow musical theatre conventions to have a musical.
Right.
And actually, if you can't experiment in new writing, where can you experiment?
Exactly. So yeah, I think that we do this trip every 4 years, and Jake is already spinning his wheels of, hey, if she asks me to do this again, I know kind of where I'm going. So that's exciting too. So
Fantastic.
kind of trying it out and doing it more, I think, is the best thing. Yeah.
Well, it's been highly enjoyable talking to you and to Jake.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me your time.
Yes.
Thank you particularly for bringing over Wall 1 and Wall 2.
Great.
A pair of walls. But really, they used to say that walls have ears, but it's the audience who have ears for listening to this particularly good set of shows.
Yeah.
Because it's been a really enjoyable, really engaging process. I see a lot of musical theatre. A lot of it is brilliant, a lot of it is not, a lot of it is average, that's human life. But not every show is a show that you're going to go away and think about, and these are a pair of shows that I'm going to go away and think about. And for me,
wow.
that is a high accolade, so thank you very much.
That is awesome. Thank you so much.
Musical talk. Well, there we are, Shaunahan and Jake Brash, and the two musicals called Wall. And as I said at the beginning of that interview, I was reminded very strongly of those two politically linked musicals by the Gershwin brothers called Of Thee I Sing and Let 'Em Eat Cake, which were produced in the early 1930s. The second one quite unsuccessfully, but the first one won a Pulitzer Prize. So when anyone tells you that musical theatre has no worth, you can tell them otherwise, and then serve them with a writ. Well, let's move on to another show, and some songs. In a minute, we'll hear a conversation I had with Lawrence T. Stannard about the show One Good Soul. But before that, we'll hear the opening number from that highly entertaining 4-star show, which is called The Song of Grinding Poverty. And please do note, the lyrics are explicit.
Another day of poverty.
Another day of shit. What's for breakfast?
Nothing.
Nothing. Gravel sun.
And grit. Another day of misery.
Another day of toil.
What do they pay us? Nothing.
Nothing.
Gravel man.
So we're the working classes and our lives are mean. We're the working classes. We're stinky and unclean. We've been shamefully exploited since we were 13. And they got the nerve to call us bitches and obscene.
Another day of robbery, another day of crime. Who do we steal from the rich? Those sleazy, greasy swine. No, they're too well protected, we'll end up getting nicked. We steal from our neighbors, cause they got no lots to pick.
Step into the rat shit streets of Sichuan. There's no goodness here, so we just do what we can. You see, the people here, they're living in fear, trying to get out. But deadlines are near and bosses they leer. Nothing to do but shout for a better day, a brighter day. Something that's worth the cost of the way we are living, the shit we are given, and everything we have lost. Our love, our life, our hair, our care for anything good and bright. Our money, our home, everything that we own, a God that's truthful and right. Screw these gods! They just degrade us. They patronize us and don't aid us. They're omniscient and omnipotent, and yet they refuse to save us. They've come to find their special one. Well, so exert all you can, cause they'll never find one good person in Sichuan.
We're the working classes and our lives are mean. We're the working classes, stinking and unclean. We've been shamefully exploited since we were 13. And they've got the nerve to call us bitches and obscene. We're the working classes, we're not worth 2 cents. We're the working classes, never pay our rent. We've had no education, but we've learned to be streetwise. You were never starving.
Yeah, so I am Lawrence T. Stannard, and I'm the musical director and composer for One Good Soul, which is a show that we have done for 2 weeks at the Forest Theatre, the Greenside.
But it's an adaptation of another piece, isn't it, first of all?
Yes, well, there's been a bit of a journey on it. So the writer of the script, Mr. Andrew Kyle, adapted The Good Person of Szechuan, which is the original Brecht, into a kind of a 3-hour loose play musical, which we did back in October 2016.
Oh, you did the full whack?
Yeah, with some songs, but that was a definite Brecht with songs, whereas this is an hour-long condensed version that is almost all sung through.
I suspect the audience will thank you for that particular
yes,
artistic decision.
It did get very long because I mean even the show that's an hour, it runs at such pace because the plot is so complex and there's so much to get through.
And it is a good Brechtian piece, isn't it? I mean, essentially, for those people who don't know the story, the version we're getting at least, is the gods come down to look for a good soul, hence the title. They find one person, they believe she has potential, they give her a little reward of money, and then she sets herself up in the shop. But because she has a little bit of money, she becomes a magnet to other people whose motives may not be quite so pure.
Yeah.
And a lot of people try and manipulate and abuse her, and both, and succeed. And she herself, although she has the good soul, or it certainly looks like it, she is not flawless. And I think that's where the dynamic tension of the piece lies, is that she's clearly the sympathy character, the character on which we're supposed to project ourselves, and yet she's not perfect. It's the musical score I want to talk about in a minute, but how are people sort of responding to the piece? Because it is, I mean, you say Brecht, and Brecht is famous for distance.
Yeah.
It's not Stanislavski, is it?
The audience reaction to it here in Edinburgh has been really interesting, just because it's such a condensed show. Everything happens so fast, and you, rather than in the original musical where you come to Shantae and you have story interweaved with kind of a bit from the gods and a bit from the narrator. In this, everything happens ridiculously fast, and you to kind of get the allegory of what's happening to Shantae, but still get the moral message through at the end. We kind of end up shouting down the audience with the message at the end, and some people like that, some people love that, and some people don't. We had a reviewer from Festmag and a little bit from Broadway Baby. They liked us, but they said they thought it was a bit bizarre how we used lively, catchy tunes to portray dark, serious messages, and I thought that's
I think let's get on to the score then, because I think in many ways the score is the glory of the piece, and this is a compliment for you. Cheers. I mean, it is, as you say, very nearly sung through, not completely. There is song after song after song, minimal dialogue, but actually I think that goes to show that first of all the songs are good in the sense that they carry the story forward, and secondly they are very catchy. But there is an element of I like the upbeat nature of it, because ultimately you could do it as a angst. Sturm, all the miserable things in life, and how many people would enjoy that? I think, but also it is ultimately, it's got an ambiguous message, but that's not to say that it's not, the journey is optimistic. Can you find the one good soul? They think they found the one good soul. Can she prove herself to be that good soul? Yeah. I think an ultimately optimistic score is quite the right way forward. I mean, how did you approach it? Because, I mean, first of all, when did you join the project? Did you write the songs for the long 3-hour version?
So yeah, it was interestingly, it was a play with songs, and you would call it a musical, but there were massive scenes of long dialogue. So I joined in...
Yeah, well, a 3-hour musical would be a bit of a slog as well.
Yeah, definitely. It was very long. I joined in July when I got talking to Mr. Andrew Kyle, who...
So this is a year ago, essentially.
Yeah, and we started... He showed me what he'd been working on, and I said I'd love to write a few songs, and it started off there as a few songs, and then it got bigger, and it was a full musical. So the 3-hour musical... was long, but there were massive scenes of dialogue. So to cut it down, we cut out reprises and repeats. But I ended up writing 4 new songs for the music for the hour-long thing, just to try and tell it as much as we can through song. And I think that if you're listening to something for an hour, you can't all be angsty. You want people to enjoy it, and more like there are definite dissonant moments. There are songs that are enjoyable to listen to, but aren't kind of, you know.
I think you're underselling yourself in a way, because the songs aren't all the same by any means. I actually like the variety of the piece. I mean, there's a very cohesive tone, which I suspect is because it's all composed by you.
Yeah.
But I also very much enjoy the different songs. It's not you're not underbedding lyrics. It's not an hour of music supporting words. They are distinct songs in distinct fields, and they come and they finish, and then you're into something else. Sometimes they dovetail into from one another. There's a number I can't describe its genre properly, but it feels like a music hall number.
Yeah.
And then there's at least one sort of much more upbeat number where you actually start the song by going 3, 4.
Yeah.
You know, to give the tempo to your band.
Part of the way it plays from my perspective is that my role on stage as the musician and kind of
this is a performing role, isn't it? You're
Yes.
not just the you're not just the music director leading on keyboards. You actually have dialogue. Minimal, but there it is.
Yeah, and it is that kind of narrator, and that's why I like that it's not word supported by music, but I'm not telling the story, but it's like there are characters on stage who are trying to express it, and me saying that. So sometimes I'm quietly playing away as people on stage, and sometimes, you know, we finish a quiet scene and I yell 3, 4 and into the next number, and I sing along or I do a little bit of a side to the audience. I mean, I think that kind of variety. I mean, there's that upbeat rock song. It starts with a kind of semi-sleazy swing number, and like, you know,
everyone likes a bit of semi-sleaze.
Semi-sleaze is fabulous. You have the gods come down, and there's the classic, you know, grand entrance as it would be for gods.
Befitting,
you know, yeah.
And that's the word. Befitting is the word.
Befitting.
Yes.
And I think, if it didn't all come from me, I would be worried that it's a bit too different. But I think that keeps it lively. And the reason I was so confused by the reviewer who thought it was a bit bizarre how we played negative issues or negative characters with upbeat songs. I mean, you can go to Disney movies and find forever villains and villainous
they've got
things.
The best,
yeah, they've got.
The devil has the best tune.
Yeah, exactly.
It's been observed.
Yeah.
But also, even bad people don't necessarily recognise themselves as bad. You know, they are playing to their own agenda. But presumably, the achievement of that agenda is a positive thing for them. So it's it's very difficult to identify someone who is speech marks bad and who does it because they are bad people.
Yes, that's kind of how we try to play it. I mean, the gods come down and have a little patter song, and then they have a grand song as they're trying to pretend to be different people, and and Shente has a little lilting song, and Yang Sun, the male lead, has a kind of vicious, angry, drunken song, and then he merges into a little like kind of romantic semi-waltz, you know, and
which is actually the journey his character takes as well. He starts off drunk, he gets angry when what he hopes for doesn't happen immediately, and then later on it does happen, but it's very manipulative.
Yeah.
He's a kaleidoscope of a character, so why shouldn't he have a kaleidoscope of musical options?
Yeah, is that? I mean, as songs, they're so completely different, but I think if it works, it works. And one of the nicest things in the process actually was kind of having that, because the angry theme was in the old show, where we don't see, and the only time Yang Sun was nice and positive, he spoke, when he talked about his dream of becoming a pilot, he spoke it all, and it kind of, I mean, you can speak like you have a passion, but it had to be,
one song, don't you?
Yeah, no, completely. I have a dream to fly, is, you know, that kind of...
it's almost asking to be musicalised, isn't it?
So much, yeah.
So, were there any things that you did reject yourself? How's the score changed over development? Are there songs you've had to drop or rework substantially? Or?
There have been... I mean, in terms of my personal process, there have been tons of ideas that I've gone, right, that's not right. 2 of the songs in the show are very different from how they were. The finale at the end, where we interweave all the tunes from the show and all the passions into this kind of big argument. And it's not opera, but you have that kind of 5 different lines going on at once.
An epic sense.
Yeah.
Right.
That's completely new, but we've worked at that for ages I brought it to the company and said, this is where I'm at with it. But also as a composer who sits at a piano, when you're trying to do five-piece work, sometimes you want to hear it, and it's helpful to work with the cast. Sometimes I've kind of gone away and done stuff myself, obviously. There have been, also because we're in a small theatre and we're almost unamplified vocally, there have been lots of songs that we've reworked from an orchestration point of view to make stuff kind of so you can hear the lyrics, and that...
You've mixed it on the hoof almost to make it work in the environment where you're not to, of course. You can't go in with grand ideas at the Fringe.
Yes.
You have to work with what you've got, because there are very few actual theatrical spaces proper, and they've all gone. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and it's been real fun. I think I threw out one show from, one song from the old show, and the rest have just been massively reworked.
So how many in the score now would you say distinct songs?
Ooh, I think about 14 songs, not including small reprises. I mean, part of Yang Sun's thing is he has two main themes and then a linking bit. So at the start, when we see him drunk and angry and talking about his dream, that is reprised later when he's talking about his dream and then becomes angry. You know, so and that
Symmetry of character and journey for him, of course.
And there are reprises in the show that are kind of the same tune. I mean, I sing a lot of the same tune as Shantae, as the kind of, we want to be seen as nice to the audience. We want to kind of relate. So I sing with her a lot and harmonise with her a lot. But there are reprises that serve a definitive purpose and move the story along quite significantly.
Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but there's actor musicians, of course. You've got people who are playing various characters, and then they come and join you in the band and play various instruments, and then reprise their role or whatever it is they're doing. So how many people in the wider band, although it always appears there's three playing more or less at the same time, are there more than three people rotating the chairs, as it were?
We have, so I'm on keys and guitar, and I'm generally fixed, and then we have a bassist, a drummer, a guitarist, two flautists, and a violinist that all kind of interweave.
At different points,
depending on the genre, depending on where around the show. It's interesting. In some moments, it's very it's definitive actor musician. They are on stage playing, and it's part of the show. Sometimes they're on stage playing, and it's like the instrument wasn't there, but they interact with it like it's something else. Yang Sun never actually plays on stage because kind of in our process we realised that as his character is a down and out, he's homeless, he's an addict, and we realised that his character would never have access to a musical instrument. He'd never, if music was his passion, it doesn't make sense. So he's there's a very definitive wall. He plays on stage, he's part of the band, but they're never linked. Whereas during one song, during the Smoke song, when they're having a laugh, they pull out flutes and join in, and that's part of their kind of let's have a good time.
Yeah, well, they're a different kind of street population, the flute players. It's perfectly possible that that kind of population might have a piccolo or something in the pocket, or in this case, flutes. But you're right. That feels much more in keeping with the characterisation. What's your favourite song? I'd like to know why as well, I think, because I always like to know what a composer treasures most amongst their own portfolio.
My favourite song is called The Beauty of the Morning and What Love Costs. It's a kind of a merging of the two. So just before we have just before the song, we have the theme of What Love Costs, where she asks, why does it matter what love costs? Why does the world think all lovers are lost? And it's that kind of thing. Can't I just be with the man I love and not worry about trying to be good or trying to be generous or any of that? They get in an argument and he slaps her.
Yes, there's a proper real moment of audience. Ooh, at that moment. Yeah.
No, the drum. It's actually one of my favourite bit to orchestrate was that the drums drop out for the last verse and then a full flam 2 sticks on the snare
to represent the
at the slap, and you get, because you're expecting the kind of the fake slap where you slap and hit your chest or whatever, the noise gets. It's really fun. And just after that, there's this tranquil bit, and it's my favourite song. Starts with a low bass note, and she sings unaccompanied for a bit, and the piano comes in really lightly. And it also is my favourite song in the show because, as the musician throughout, I've been trying to help her, and she's kind of almost not listened to my advice and gone for this man, and now he's hurt her, and I can't, as the kind of narrator character in me, I can't help her anymore, and I'm accompanying her sadly, and it's kind of tear-jerking, but all I can be is an accompanist. And it's one of the reasons I really like the actor-musician role, because in some cases it's playing because there's a song there, but in when there's a solo character on stage and I'm playing, there's a really nice relationship going on.
It's a musical interaction, and then there's a sort of acting interaction, if such a thing could be said to exist, isn't there? Yes, quite.
Yeah.
Yes, you do some, I was going to say feverish nodding, but it's not feverish at all, it's just sort of gentle, kind of actually what we, the audience, are thinking in our head, don't go with this man, he's horrible.
Yeah.
He's such a manipulative man as well, he claims he's going to hang himself in her shop to punish her for not
Yeah.
giving him a job. He's not a man I'd like to know, I must
No,
say.
definitely not.
So, the audience responses, we've just touched on some of the reviews, but the audience response seemed very positive for the performance I saw yesterday.
Very positive. I mean, maybe it was just the show, but we've done 6 shows this week, and we've had positive responses every night. The one reviewer who didn't enjoy it, we've spoken about, but it's been really positive, and I think, getting a Brecht piece and compressing it down, is always difficult, and the show kind of rockets on through the different themes and the plot, and because the characters at the end, they're still their characters, but it finally breaks away from the story that's going on and just kind of shouts the message. And I think they often come out, what we've seen is they come out enjoying the show, sympathising with the characters, and that kind of final message in their face. Everyone who's come out has been very thoughtful. Well,
it's Brechtian alienation.
Yeah.
We're going to get down to the theory. And of course, that's not a sugar-covered pill that is punched into you for you to respond to in whatever way you want to respond to it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a certain amount of ambiguity anyway in the outcome, isn't there?
Yeah.
I mean, I still wouldn't be able to tell you if she is speech marks successful as being a good soul,
Yeah.
because she does do some. I mean, certainly in the second act or the equivalent thereof. I mean, it's obviously it's a 1 act, 1 hour, but what feels like the second act, she does something that I think is quite terrible. So.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, and that's the point. Again, when you compress it down, you can't see as much. But in the old show, it opens with the narrator kind of explaining, and we see a lot more of Shantae being lovely. I mean, in this show, it is clear that she is a lovely person, but
circumstances have pushed her into lots of bad avenues.
Yeah, and it's. I mean, that's the point, that you can have the nicest person in the world, but if you put that kind of pressure on them, and yeah, it's deliberately ambiguous at the end. The gods go off saying, "It's taught me the true worth of heaven's charms and how amazing life is," but they leave very hastily, and that kind of we failed. Yeah.
So, is there any way people can hear any of the music? Have you got anything on SoundCloud, or how can people find out more about you as a composer?
I mean, we recorded a full CD, the full cast recording, after the show in October, which are on sale. If you follow us on Twitter or message us on Twitter, we are One Good Soul at One Good Soul 2017, and you can find more about me there if you are interested.
So your name again?
Lawrence T. Stannard.
Do you want to spell that surname? Because it's a little unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, Lawrence T-Stannard.
The letter T. Yeah.
The letter T. It's just a bit trying to not be pretentious, but ends up pretentious anyway. So.
Although on Twitter, shortening a real name is helpful anyway. So
yes. But yeah, I'm on Twitter as LT Stannard if you want to find me.
Well, Lawrence, I have to say, thank you so much. I very much enjoyed the show, but I will tell you I enjoyed the score even more. I think it's a really excellent professional score. I think it's entirely in keeping with the piece that we've seen. And I think that you show great potential for the future. That sounds so patronising, but what I mean is, let's have some more, please. So hopefully I'll see you at next year's Fringe.
Yes.
With an even better soul? I don't know.
Yeah.
Good soul too?
Yeah.
Whatever you think.
No, thank you very much. It's been very fun to talk about it. And yeah, I mean, it's a project that kind of, it's finished, but it definitely has more to go. I mean, compressing it and then extending it makes me think about the future and where the show can go.
It still has legs.
Yeah. Definite legs.
So people can follow that on Twitter and find out if it is coming to a place near them.
Yes, please do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What does it matter what love costs? Why does the world think all lovers are lost? Can't I be happy and good? Isn't love better than food? I know the world will think badly of me, but in the end I just have to be free. Free to follow my heart. This is the man I love.
Well, there we are, another song from One Good Soul. It's called What Does It Matter What Love Costs? And that was written by Lawrence T. Stannard, who we heard in conversation there. He is an impressive writer and he has an impressive stage presence. And incidentally, the day I went to see a performance of One Good Soul, I was in awfully good company because I was sitting in the audience with Eddie Izzard. Well, that's very nearly it for today's episode, but we do have a couple of goodies left. There's one more song to hear from the excellent Murderous Philanthropist of Croydon Town. But first, here's a little insert from everybody's friend and particularly his own Nick Hudson, who's got a few words to say about Derren Brown's new show in London. Here's Nick. Musical talk.
I'd like to talk about Underground, which is playing at the Playhouse Theatre in London's Embankment. It's Derren Brown's latest show, which is a mash-up of all his previous shows, where he takes the best magic tricks and puts them into one eminently satisfying piece. Now, we've often talked about Derren Brown on Musical Talk. It's not a musical. He doesn't burst into song. But what we've always liked about his show is that he is inherently theatrical, a Victorian showman, possibly the best showman in the world, and it's always a joy to see him perform on our shores. What's interesting is that this show, he started off as a tiny test at the Charing Cross Theatre, which he then took to America, where he played it not on Broadway but off Broadway, so he's obviously trying to break into the Americas. I, as a fan of magic, always enjoy seeing his shows, and what's interesting with this one is that I went twice. It was so good within the space of a week, and it was really interesting to see what was the same, what was different, what worked, what didn't work, and what went wrong, and what stayed correct. And what you think goes wrong in the first show, the first time you see it, is sort of actually meant to go wrong. As with all Derren shows, he says, do not reveal what happens in the show. So this is always an easy review to do here on Musical Talk, but I really do urge you to go and see it. It's playing until the 14th of October, so that gives you plenty of time to go and check this wonderful genius showman out. Really, really do try and do it if you can.
Musical talk. Well, there we are, Nick Hudson there, with just a few words about a non-musical show which has obviously tickled his proverbial fancy. And I don't know that Nick gets tickled that often, and certainly not there. And whilst that particularly unusual thought is rolling around your brain and making you wince, let's bring this show to an end. But we're going to end it in style with another song by Alistair McNamara and the group known as Intrepid Fools from the Murderous Philanthropist of Croydon Town. And if you want to find out more about that theatrical group, you can find them on Facebook. I really enjoyed the show when I saw it in Edinburgh, and I just wish it had been on a little bit longer than 1 week. So, in a minute we'll hear The Croydon Blues. But before that, you're going to hear a bald old man saying goodbye. And here he comes now. Goodbye!
It's good to meet you, Quincy's bride.
Quincy's bride.
I've so much to tell you. I think you'll find your new husband's got a dark side, but I have to concede
He has to concede.
he's not the only fella around here with a dark side, you see.
The blue of your eyes is as deep as the blue of the night, and they shine like Orion as he guides us through each summer night.
Johnson! As I was singing, from birth my mother was always tipsy.
Always tipsy.
Instead of milk, she raised me on a strict diet of whiskey. Ain't been sober since, and I won't start now.
He won't start now.
I live here in the underpass. Let me show you around.
The blue of your eyes is as deep as the blue of the night, and they shine like Orion.
Johnson! I swear you interrupt me again. I care for the orphans. They're all alone. They're only children, but they've got no home. I'm blue Isabella. This has to come to an end. That's why I told you to come here if you needed a friend.
Quincy's a liar, we know it's true. But what are the secrets keeping from you?
Watch your back, Isabella. There's something wrong with that man.
Something wrong with that man.
And if you need to get away, girl, you know where I am.
Johnson! This episode of Musical Talk edited and presented by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2017, except for the songs, where the copyright remains with the creators. And my great thanks go to Lawrence T. Stannard and Alistair McNamara for allowing me to play their songs in this episode. To find out more about the world of Musical Talk and listen to past episodes, go along to our website www.musicaltalk.co.uk or subscribe to us on iTunes and follow us on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, you can, at Musical Talk Thos.
I think that is what I am most proud of in the piece.
Ladies and gentlemen, the house is now open for this evening's performance of alternative a cappella. Please make your way to -1. The house is now open for this morning's performance of alternative a cappella. Please make your way to -1. Thank you.
She'll do that again in 2 minutes. And did you notice originally she said this evening?
Yeah, there you go.
Very good.
There you
That'll
go.
be in the outtakes, don't worry.
Love it, love it.
Johnson!